Hey, good morning, everyone. It is Sunday, February 27th, 2022 at 9:43 a.m. my time, and we're approaching 215,000 views on hashtag Patrick Lovell. As it turns out, we're about 550,000 views on hashtag The Con, which we share with Whoopi Goldberg, who has a ridiculous television series called The Con, which is nowhere near what we've done with our television series, The Con. And of course, Don the Con Trump is up there, but it looks like my image has surpassed both of those. And we actually have complete dominance on the hashtag Muckraker, which is, of course, is what I am. That's got over 40,000 views now. And the other one that I really enjoy is hashtag Justifiably Furious, is something that we have complete ownership of, and that's 70,000 at the moment. I'm starting to see a bleed over in everything. My Twitter is blowing up. Many people are coming to me on Facebook now, and we're seeing more numbers on the YouTube channel where we've seen over 100 hours of content consumed by people out there that didn't exist 2 days ago. And that is hashtag Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. And that's actually the name of the YouTube page as well. So once again, Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. I'm a muckraker journalist. I'm an investigative journalist and a television producer. I've been in the business for a long time. I produced a 5-part television series that reveals the answers the world is looking for, and that the entire system of power has gone to extreme lengths to prevent you from learning. But we're in the midst of it all right now, and I'll make that all make sense. But first, please, whatever you do, go to www.thecon.tv. And there, if you'll discover our television series, and there's tons of free content on the videos tab that you can learn about all of the different elements of what constitutes the con. But of course, our series puts it all together in a way that you have to see to believe. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So the reason I decided to hit play this morning is, like always, there's just so much information coming at all of us fast and furious. But I'm in this unique position to be able to make a lot of it makes sense in a way that you've never heard before, and you never will. And it's really the truth that undergirds everything. So I'm going to start with the invasion of Ukraine and what has been revealed, that the Russians and Vladimir Putin have increased the threat level of the nuclear defense to its top level. And so the other day I happened to record one of these, and I just, in passing, had made the connection to World War I and how that was triggered by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of Austria-Hungarian Empire, which is thought of as the tripwire that led to World War I, that led to 40 million deaths, during a population of 1.8 billion people. We currently have close to 8 billion people on the planet, and if Russia, through this invasion, and suddenly goes to its highest level nuclear threat in context to some other things that are happening nationwide. Now, worldwide. I've been hearing a lot about China supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I wasn't quite sure why that might be, but then it occurred to me, based on some things I heard this morning, that this might be the answer. Apparently, the Chinese Air Force has been penetrating Taiwan airspace over the last 48 hours, and it would be very intriguing if China made a move to invade Taiwan. Obviously, that's been an ongoing struggle, as has Ukraine and Russia, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think the thing that I want to try to create a connection to in terms of what we reveal in the con, and I think this is what the entire world is under the thumb of, that you need to understand how this whole thing works. So Russia's economy took a 40% hit in the stock market. I think their billionaires lost a total of $38 billion on Friday. And I think that the stock market, when it opens on Monday, could lead to an absolute collapse of the Russian economy. And there's this international financial apparatus known as SWIFT. And the United States has apparently a large influence there. I think it's run out of Belgium, but we, in some capacity, have been able to freeze Russian banks and Russian assets through the SWIFT program and stop payment plans that obviously the Russians depend on, particularly as it relates to the purchase of their gold. Sorry, let me slow down a little bit. Their oil and their natural gas. And so apparently China had offered for Russia to come over to their version of SWIFT, which would make a whole lot of sense if China is going to invade Taiwan, and Russia is making a move in Ukraine, and they're going to create their own financial apparatus to counter, what the SWIFT program is, and this globalism that's really undergirded the whole system. So when you think back to the analogy of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand at the beginning of the onset of World War I, that created, that triggered World War I. I mean, where we are now is a much more precarious situation than it was then. And obviously, there's 8 billion people. So if you just do the math, I mean, I remember trying to go through this exercise once, that if the equivalent of what died during World War II, for example, is 50 to 70 million people, and that was a population of like 2.5 billion, then, at 8 billion, the same percentages, I think we were looking at like 400 million dead. That would be significant. And that would change a lot of things. And hopefully we're not going down that path. But meanwhile, the system is still the system. So if there was a World War III right now, think about it. Who would it be fighting for? It would be fighting for the global interests of global hegemonies and billionaires. From where I'm standing, it's absurd. It's absurd when the population of the United States has been completely betrayed by a financial system that launched this incredible, massive, quite preemptive strike against the American people by first getting rid of the golden goose, which is our manufacturing base and everything else that undergirds neoliberalism and financial policy of over 4 decades that led to NAFTA and all of these trade periods. And I'm not an isolationist, right? But at the same time, I believe in common sense. There's got to be balance. Globalism's got to work in a way where there's shared prosperity, and that it's not about exploitation and rape of the masses to benefit, 0.001% of the population that controls everything, that is about to launch potentially World War III. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it could happen. I mean, ridiculous things have happened throughout the course of history, and I hope that we're not at that space. But, a couple of things that I have to also bring into this conversation was a monumental interview that took place on Jon Stewart. In fact, we should hashtag this, a message to Jon Stewart, because I've been watching a lot of Jon Stewart's podcasts on Apple. And, I find myself getting more and more intrigued with Jon Stewart. I enjoyed Jon Stewart when he had a show on Comedy Central, of course, and he always had great guests, and particularly during the 2008 financial crisis and afterwards, of course, in the aftermath. He always had great guests, and there was a lot of important pieces of the puzzle that he put together, and Jon Stewart always had great instincts. I mean, Jon Stewart's just kind of like a regular salt-of-the-earth guy. I think he came up working in the restaurant industry in New York as a bartender before he became a comedian, and then he went on to obviously great success, right? But again, like all of the other comedians that I enjoy listening to, whether it's Joe Rogan, whether it's Russell Brand, and of course, Jon Stewart, they're tremendous human beings with an incredible wit and insight and intellectual capacity that just seems to come natural to comedians. I think they're, touched by God, because I wish I had the sense of humor as those guys do. I certainly love to laugh, but at the same time, there's no laughing matter about the world we live in. And the reason I'm bringing up Jon Stewart right now is because he had 2 important guests on a show that I just saw yesterday, but I saw, through all of the different social media scenarios that these guys appeared. I think it might have been Friday when the show was recorded, but it was Dr. Stephanie Kelton, who is pretty much the chief spokesperson for what's known as modern monetary theory. And then she was joined by a gentleman by the name of Rohan Grey, a gentleman that I've actually interacted with. I've met in person, we've talked several times because I've actually been a part of the MMT framework. I attended a big conference back in 2019 where I actually got to meet Stephanie Kelton face to face. But prior to that, I had actually on many occasions spoken with Stephanie Kelton because I was desperately reaching out to her back in 2016 because I, through my work, had basically been mentored because I sought him out, and then one thing led to another, and we were able to understand really the world of William K. Black. William K. Black is a huge influence in our work in the con. In fact, he's the reason the con exists. I happened to discover him one Sunday afternoon back in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis when he landed on a Sunday morning show that was done by Bill Moyers on PBS, relatively obscure to the mass audience. But he started answering questions that I was desperate for. And nobody in mainstream media had made sense to me until I heard William K. Black make me understand what was actually happening in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis. And I was like, that's who I got to talk to. And so one thing led to another. I picked up the phone. I called Bill. We spoke. The first time I spoke to him, he was down in South America giving a lecture, and he dumped about 4 hours of information on my head that changed my life. And from that point forward, we were off and running to make the con. And as it turns out, Bill is a professor of economics at UKMC, as well as criminology at the University of Minnesota. He goes back and forth. He's an expert. He was, as I've mentioned in previous, what people are trying to figure out, if these are rants, if I'm bitching, they're really editorials of me on the fly based on the knowledge that I have and what I'm trying to reveal to you, which of course is what I'm demonstrating now. So hopefully that makes sense. And, Bill Black, had worked side by side or within the same university, same program as Stephanie Kelton and many others that are very important to my education. And at that time period, I was desperately trying to reach out to Bernie Sanders. In fact, I got in contact with his communications director over the course of many, many months, and that led us also to Elizabeth Warren's gatekeepers. And I kept banging on their door to try to get an interview with both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren because of the truths that I was learning from Bill Black, which told me everything I needed to know. And plus, I started to find these whistleblowers at the highest levels of the story that I had found through the work, quite frankly, of Matt Taibbi initially and some others. And then I got them on the phone. And as I've learned in all of these situations, the stories that they were able to tell, certain journalists or potentially certain producers. In the case of Dick Bowen, when he landed on Scott Pelley and 60 Minutes. Actually, it wasn't Scott Pelley, but anyway, I don't want to get hung up on that for now because my mind's flying, as you can imagine. So, these are the highest level whistleblowers that some of these great journalists had provided information about, but they were really just tiny pieces of really what the whole was. And so the reason this should be hashtag Jon Stewart is because I've been watching Jon Stewart for a very long time. Jon Stewart is asking some monumental questions. He has monumental access because, of course, he has a huge audience. And he's a really, really good guy. And he's very sharp. I got to be honest with you. The guy knows a lot. He does a lot of, obviously, he ramps up. He gets his head around whatever the topics are that he's going to ask people. But boy, has he had some tremendous access to people, and he didn't know what questions to ask. So, for example, he interviewed CEO of Chase, Jamie Dimon, not too long back, and he just wasn't equipped to handle that interview, honestly. And it's not a put down of Jon Stewart. It's just what I have to get to Jon Stewart, like I have to get this information to the people. And this is why I do this every day. And so Stephanie Kelton and Rohan Gray appeared on the show because they had heard another show that Jon Stewart had done with a former Fed director, I think, of the Kansas City Fed, Thomas Honig, where Thomas Honig had made some mentions about certain policy prescriptions and things that work in the economic system that they just needed to reorient Jon to understand because Jon didn't fully see the big picture. And so Rohan Gray was extremely critical of Thomas Honig for leaving out specific information and acting if he was a pawn high because, and I'm sure a lot of people out there understand this feeling, but when you don't have all the information, sometimes you feel too dumb to ask the questions, right? So if you're talking to economists, a lot of the time they speak, with this language that you're not familiar with. So you don't know what questions to ask. You're disoriented. You don't understand it. It doesn't apply to your life. You think it's separate. And so it's too far away to wrap your head around, but it's not. And I'm here to try to fill in the blanks. And that's why I'm talking about this particular episode. And so, as the interview progresses, and we're getting really important information from Ms. Kelton. And again, Stephanie Kelton wound up being the economic advisor to Bernie Sanders. She wrote a terrific book called The Deficit Myth. And what she describes is really how modern monetary policy can be used for the people as opposed to what it actually is currently being used for. And it's extremely important. But what my partner, Eric Vaughn, and I had discovered when we first started studying modern monetary theory, and I'm no expert, and quite frankly, there's a whole lot of different people within the spectrum of the MMT elite that get to address the public, try to convey what's going on in terms of economic policy to get regular people to understand this. The person that I kept being drawn to was a gentleman by the name of Fadel Kaboub, who I think is one of the most impactful people I've ever met in my life. And I think he is the most important economist I've come to understand on this journey. But in this particular case, Fidel Kaboub wasn't on that interview. And as it was an incredibly important interview, what I found Jon Stewart asking over and over and over again was he was searching for an understanding of corruption. He knew corruption exists, and he knew corruption was on the winning end of monetary policy, but he didn't know how to put it together. And unfortunately, Ms. Kelton, for whatever reason, I can't even imagine all of the different types of things that might be going through their head and what the agenda may be and everything else. But let's just say that I'm on the side of Stephanie Kelton and Rohan Grey, and I want to see these guys, get more and more attention. But what I'm bringing you through the con is the other side of the coin that you and Jon Stewart absolutely have to understand. So Jon Stewart is trying to percolate this notion that, wait a second, we continue to provide trillions and trillions of dollars to a monetary system that basically banks the entirety of this process on asset valuation, which is, again, is contrary to what I've been saying in these videos the last couple of times. And if you explore them all, or if you listen to my full lectures, editorials on YouTube at Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con, you'll see this continuity of what I'm trying to tell you. Because what I discovered was, at first, when I went through the 2008 financial crisis and I was facing foreclosure and I was dealing with what we call servicers trying to negotiate a remodification on my home, because I had heard all of these things coming out of the Obama administration through programs called the Home Affordable Modification Program, which adjusts, what you paid because I lost income. I had to go find a second job. It's a long story. A lot of it, it was in my first film, Forward 13, and then it comes through the con. But I'm not really important to this other than I'm a gateway. I'm a conduit to what it is that I'm trying to tell you. And Jon Stewart, again, was asking the right questions about corruption, but they didn't go into corruption at all. In fact, it was just something that kept getting put off onto the side. But corruption is the story, because this is what happened in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis. First of all, you got to understand what created the financial crisis, which was what we put into the con. And nobody has ever gotten to the American people, not the New York Times, not Forbes, the LA Times, so on and so forth, MSNBC and CBS, all of them. Nobody, they all did bits and pieces, but nobody put the whole story together. And I guess my assumption is ultimately they were all waiting for the Department of Justice to do it so they could jump on that. Because the way big time media works is it's access to power in the institutions, and where they come down is really the kind of the rule of the law of the land, right? And so therefore, if the Department of Justice doesn't actually go the distance and prove corruption through the FBI and everything else, well, then mainstream just kind of took it for what it was. And the end story was that it was the subprime people that pulled a shtick on Wall Street that tanked the global economy. And so that Hank Paulson and Timothy Geithner and Ben Bernanke saved the world. There were these heroes that came in with this new Federal Reserve policy that basically created liquidity to save the world. Well, what they did was they saved rich people, and tens of millions of people went through the freaking meat grinder and had their lives wrecked and destroyed through a court system that knew they were being foreclosed upon illegally, even though we had what was known as the National Mortgage Settlement, where the banks had to pay $25 billion to the states, and they were supposed to remodify loans. And of course, famously, Barack Obama makes a big claim that, that delivered. It didn't deliver. I think it delivered 1 in 10. Quite frankly, we're potentially the numbers probably much lower than that. Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, claims that she went after the banks and did this glory work for the American people. There's millions of people on the streets in California right now because of what Kamala Harris didn't do. She ended up getting a much bigger settlement than the rest of the states because California is just that much bigger. But the settlement that she got went into the coffers to backfill the losses for state revenue. Okay? That didn't save the people that were set up in this con that I'm trying to tell you is what constitutes the fraud that Jon Stewart is trying to ask people like Stephanie Kelton and people at the Fed. And he had Jamie Dimon in the crosshairs, and he didn't have the information that if he had in the con, which starts with the origination fraud, which was based on liar's loans that got used because, appraisers did phony appraisals because they were told by the lenders to do it, and if they didn't do it, they'd lose their jobs, to be able to stimulate this growth on high-yield spread premiums that went into the credit rating agencies owned by the likes of Warren Buffett, where they did tens of millions of these loans over and over and over, all based on deceptive acts and practices, which then leads to illegal reps and warranties within the frickin' construct that went into the derivatives that blew up the world. So it's a smash and grab. Sorry, I'm losing my temper. My God, that's why I'm probably not invited on Jon Stewart, because they need polite conversation. But this isn't polite. And so I'm the only one that's trying to say, look, we got set up. These guys destroyed millions of people like Addie Polk, who LeBron James grew up 400 feet away from in Akron, Ohio, a dignified woman who owned her house, who had it stolen because of documentation fraud, and she had to freaking shoot herself in the chest 4 times instead of go homeless. And yet LeBron James is actually playing with Jamie Dimon. And I'm going to say that unwittingly. LeBron James doesn't know this stuff. The guy's the king in the basketball court doing what he does. I'm a fan. But I would certainly appreciate it if somebody could let LeBron James know that playing ball with Jamie Dimon isn't really good. Just like the other side. And I got to segue to this real quick because this is how it goes. So on the front page of the New York Times this morning was a really beautiful tribute to Trayvon Martin. And of course, it involves a handful of important African-American intellects, as well as, Reverend Al Sharpton, of course, and then, of course, Barack Obama. And they're talking about how Trayvon Martin changed everything and basically created this next civil rights type like movement that, dominoed what became the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay. But a couple of things you need to kind of think about in this context, right? First of all, 60% of African-American household wealth dissipated because of the great financial crisis because Wall Street targeted African-Americans first. Okay. Let's not forget that they also got the white working class over decades of basically killing the golden goose because we went into this, globalism based on neoliberalism and financialization that I continue to tell you guys about, which has existed forever. And this is our system. And so Barack Obama comes out, Mr. Change you can believe in, but he's just another node in the Democratic Wall Street meritocracy that follows a long tradition, of Clinton, who basically changed the Democratic Party to play ball and let Wall Street rule everything. And then, because the Democrats weren't that, for its previous 100 years prior to that, where I shouldn't go 100 years because then we get into slavery, but for let's say going back to the FDR administration. So then, Clinton's working and doing the dirty work for Wall Street because of deregulation, decriminalization, and desupervision. And then we get into, of course, Bush 1, who was a joke, and then and then Obama, who was the cover man. He was the cleanup guy. He was Mr. Change we can believe in, but he put all the guys that created this madness into positions of power just long enough so that the Federal Reserve, through John Paulson and Ben Bernanke and Timothy Geithner, could make sure the American people were foam on the runway for a financial terrorist hit on the American people who destroyed the American dream. And that's where I came from, because they tried to destroy me. They tried to leave me out in the desert naked with nothing. And I worked myself back and I battled for 13 freaking years and I got all the freaking answers, including all of the developments, as I've mentioned to you, Mr. Stewart, of the answers about corruption that you're looking for. What you need to know, John, is that when they're talking about buying back bonds through quantitative easing, what they're talking about are toxic assets that are built through this mythical machine that was created initially through the 2008 financial crisis, through liar's loans, through the credit rating agencies, and Warren Buffett was in on it, okay? Among other people. They were all in on it. And then Obama comes to clean it up, and then he's talking to us now, what year is it? 2022, about Black Lives Matter, about the importance of Trayvon Martin, about all of these things that I want so desperately to believe in Barack Obama because he's such a charismatic guy, such an intellectual guy, really, for the most part, a beautiful human being that unfortunately I know covered for fricking Wall Street, that buried Addie Polk, who's an African American. So I'm not a Trumper. I'm not a MAGA saying I hate Barack Obama because, I'm Mr. White this and everything else. No, man. Barack Obama just played this fricking shell game where I guess he thought the world was going to collapse if the people knew the truth. So what he did was he lied. And there's no way he didn't know this. There is no way he didn't know this. I have on camera a gentleman by the name of Ira Reingold who wrote anti-predatory legislation with Barack Obama when he was a junior senator in Illinois. He tells me on camera Barack Obama understood everything about liar's loans. How could he not if he wrote the legislation to prevent it? So he was a good guy. But then he gets elected president on Change We Can Believe In, and Wall Street 6 months before got completely on board with Obama. And then when Obama came in, the first thing he does is he puts everybody back in control who were from that, president's working group, like Larry Summers and all of the guys that came out of the Clinton administration, particularly Robert Rubin and the whole Citibank fiasco, which I'll bring full circle to Dick Bowen, who appears, and this is going to be in the news as the midterms come together, that, Donald Trump, or I should say oh my God, I'm going so all over the place that it's hard to keep my mind straight. The National Archives. The National Archives has asked the Department of Justice to investigate Donald Trump for, getting rid of documents, classified documents while he was in the presidency, literally flushing documents down the toilet in the White House. How's that for a freaking image? I mean, doesn't surprise me, but it's insanity, right? But that being equal, imagine that we have in the con a gentleman by the name of Dick Bowen, who was a senior underwriter at Citigroup, who learned that they were selling $90 billion a year of illegal reps and warranties in these toxic assets that didn't meet their reps and warranties. And he just did his job as a professional who was also a Republican, minister and a man of the Lord. And he just wasn't going to do the wrong thing. And so he knew that these things were going to blow up on the world. And what he did was he goes to his boss and his boss's boss and everybody else. And then Robert Rubin gets named chairman of Citigroup. And then, because of these laws called Sarbanes-Oxley, and Dick Bowen knew exactly how to frame all of these scenarios, he put the board on notice alongside, Robert Rubin that they were on the hook for $90 billion of illegal activity. And if we had an honest a group of people in those positions, they would have stopped doing everything immediately. They would have purged everything. The Department of Justice would have said, stop, hit the brakes. We're going to get rid of this corruption. We're going to purge it because we're a nation of integrity where no man is above the law. They would have gone after these CEOs who pulled this off all based on control fraud, which is on display on the con. Watch it over and over because that's what this is all about. Control fraud. Ultimately, it's perverse incentives through short-term incentives that ultimately are played with other people's money through what's known as Grisham's dynamic, which again is all on display in the con. So, I'm firing off on all the cylinders. Let me go back to Barack Obama for just 1 minute. So Barack Obama, again, is now suddenly delivering this message about Trayvon Martin and the civil rights movement of Black Lives Matter. I wonder why that could be. Was Barack Obama leading the charge of Black Lives Matter? Somebody remind me. Was he in the streets in New York, Chicago, LA, whatever, literally demonstrating? Was he showing that he supported Black Lives Matter there? Maybe he had a couple of comments here and there in support, but was he on the front lines? Remind me, because I don't remember seeing that. Was that because there was, all sorts of chaos involved? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that's what he would say. But if he was a real civil rights leader, don't you think he would have shown up on the steps of Washington, D.C. and actually confronted the problems that led to, Black Lives Matter in a way that was more robust? Well, that's just not what guys like Barack Obama do. Quite frankly, that's not what Bernie Sanders does or Elizabeth Warren. They speak in platitudes. They're not telling you the details of what it is that I'm telling you, Jon Stewart, and the world. Unfortunately, Jon Stewart asked the right questions of Stephanie Kelton and Rohan Gray, but they're not criminologists like Bill Black. Jon Stewart, if you want to understand what the hell's going on to answer the questions that you want, they're in the con. Please, talk to Bill Black. Call me. I've got his number. Literally, he's the guy you want to talk to. I want the whole world to understand who Bill Black is. That's what I'm trying desperately to create, what I call the Great Resurrection, to create this mass civil rights-like movement to purge corruption. And the way you do it is through a modern-day Pecora-like hearing, of which I'm the muckraker that put all this truth together because the New York Times, the LA Times, MSNBC, Fox, and everybody else didn't do because they're all getting paid by it, because if the Federal Reserve doesn't provide it to the assets manager to back up all these cases, these assets, none of these institutions have money for payroll. So everybody's working for the situation, and they brush it under the rug. Meanwhile, things like Black Lives Matter happen, right? Where that stuff blows up, and then Barack Obama gets to come in right before the midterms and say, this is what we should do, and this is what it's all about. Again, he says these beautiful, shining words, but at the same time, when it comes to actually giving us the details, he's not doing that. And when it comes to actually getting in the trenches, he's not doing that either. Because, I guess when you're worth $140 million, you don't do stuff like that. Or if you come out of Harvard, probably. Look, I do it because I care deeply. I am about integrity, life, liberty, and pursuit of the justice and the law working for the common man. So we have dynamism. So the American dream lives, and we have fairness. Does that mean that I think that crime is going to go away? Of course not. Crime will always exist. But it's different than having crime run the system, which then takes me full circle to what I started with potentially it being World War III. So when I look at all the markers for what created World War I, quite frankly, and World War II, World War II makes a lot more sense because of the Treaty of Versailles and where we were going, and people could see it a mile long because of the rise of Hitler and what he was going to do, especially when he went across, his peace treaties with Stalin initially, and of course Neville Chamberlain, and then he invaded, the Sudetenland, which is what everybody's talking about, and then that leads, of course, to the Luxembourg countries, Belgium and in the Netherlands and so forth, and then Norway, and then into France and the Blitzkrieg, and then ultimately, it's unbelievable stories of World War II and sacrifice and everything else that led to 70 million deaths, right? So are we on the verge of World War III where all this stuff could go on? Yeah, but let's think about the ridiculous nature of it. It feels more like World War I, quite frankly, because of it's a combination of it all, because all of this story continues to move forward because society and corruption and the dark forces have always been there. They will always be there. But in the United States, we've got a great history of the revolution against King George III, the Civil War, World War II and D-Day, not to mention the Civil Rights Movement, and of course all of the other great stuff that the United States has done in context to all the horrible stuff that we've done. So if China is going to potentially invade Taiwan, if the Russian economy is about to blow up, if they're going to create another, an international, shall we say, partnership between countries that are on the Russian-China side that are different than the SWIFT apparatus in Western Europe and everything else led by the Federal Reserve, hey man, is that enough for World War III to trigger? Yeah, I think it might be. Do I know if it is or not? Nobody can predict the future, but what I can say, knowing where I came from, is I don't want the United States to get involved with a world war when we have to clean up our own mess. We have to be a country that actually is dignified within the principles of what constitute what we are. And if we're not that, then we cannot by any means go stick our nose into other people's business because we have no credibility, right? Neither does, quite frankly, Putin and billionaires and China and state autocracy and, everybody taking over. We got to create the resurrection based on life, liberty, and justice for all. And if you don't understand the details of the corruption and the facts, you're lost. And that's my message, quite frankly, to you, Jon Stewart. You're so close, man. You're asking all the right questions. But all the answers are in The Con, www.thecon.tv. You can find me on YouTube at Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs The Con. I was at 215,000 views and over 530,000 views on 2 hashtags, the Patrick Lovell on TikTok and The Con, and it's growing like wildfire. And I think it's because I'm finally starting to reach the people that have been impacted by this. In fact, I will just say this in closing. Yeah, there's a lot of people who think I don't know what I'm talking about because they couldn't tie their shoelaces together on level 1 of what I'm talking about, let alone being able to figure out whether or not I'm legitimate. But there is a growing course of people that have gone through this madness and are looking for answers, and then they discover the answers and hear what I'm saying, and they're like, oh my God, it's like the veil has been lifted. Yeah, because that's what happened to me. Because I had to find the answers. And I swear to God, by the way, in terms of credibility, many of us have to trust the professionalism of the New York Times, for example, right? I've worked with some of the top editors, the editorialists, and quite frankly, the contributors to the New York Times. I've got them on camera telling us what it's all about. It's in The Con. Again, I'll finish with this. Somebody said to me, this prosecutor out of Ohio connects with me on Twitter, and he retweeted one of my tweets yesterday, and he said, look, The Con is the prosecution. It's the trial that never took place. And a lot of people who know the story inside and out, they'll say, well, look, we had the Federal Crisis Investigation Committee. We had, which took over 1,000 interviews, and it was bipartisan, and it really landed a lot of the answers that I reveal on the con, quite frankly. But we found more, unfortunately, and we ultimately know that it was kind of like the 9/11 Commission. It was there to make it look like the government found the answers, and they didn't. They just played the long game. They just made sure that nobody would pay attention, and we moved on to other things. And that's just what we do in the United States because we got the bandwidth of a squirrel. Guys, we got to plug in, man. We got to focus. We got to concentrate. If you want to join the movement, please do. Please. I know there's more good people out there than evil bastards. I know it with everything that I am. I hope I make it and live long enough to see the day where we triumph. Onwards and upwards. Peace.